Welcome to the Great Indian AI Podcast channel. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Book of Numbers from the Bible.
The Book of Numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
Numbers.
Yeah, an ancient text math.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of rules.
Right.
Not exactly a page turner, right?
Yeah.
But trust me,
Okay.
this book is way more interesting than its name suggests.
Really?
We're going to uncover some surprisingly relevant insights about leadership community and dealing with the unknown.
Okay.
Challenges that are just as real for us today, thousands of years later.
I mean, those are certainly universal themes, right? Leadership community facing the unknown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So stick with us on the Great Indian AI Podcast channel, and I promise you'll walk away with some real food for thought. You might even see yourself reflected in these ancient stories.
So we're talking about human nature then.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I think sometimes we have this idea that history is like this distant, irrelevant thing. But when you look at texts like the Book of Numbers, you realize that human nature hasn't really changed that much.
No, it hasn't.
The same fears, the desires, the struggles that the Israelites face are still playing out in our lives today.
So let's set the stage.
Okay.
We're talking about the Israelites in the Sinai Desert, fresh out of Egypt on their way to the Promised Land.
Yeah.
Think of the Book of Numbers as a sort of travel journal.
A travel journal.
Yeah. It records their census,
Yeah.
the laws they were given, and all the key events they experienced during this epic journey.
So like a mix of practical information and narrative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And at the center of it all
Yeah.
is Moses acting as the leader and the go-between for God and the people.
Right. That dynamic right from the start really sets up these themes of leadership and divine guidance that run throughout the book.
And talk about organization.
Oh, yeah.
In the first few chapters,
Okay.
we get this incredibly detailed census. I mean, they were in the middle of the wilderness.
The wilderness.
How did they even manage that? But they categorize everyone by tribe, family, and even age. The Book of Numbers tells us there were over 600,000 men fit for war. And that doesn't even include women and children.
Wow, 600,000. That's a lot of people to keep track of.
Right.
Especially in the wilderness.
It makes you wonder how they managed the logistics.
Oh, absolutely.
Feeding everyone, keeping track of supplies.
Yeah.
I mean, 600,000 men, it must have been a logistical nightmare.
It must have been. And, this meticulous counting, this wasn't just about keeping track. It reveals this deep-seated need for order and structure.
I see.
Imagine you're leading this massive group of people through completely unknown territory.
Right.
Establishing a clear sense of order, who belongs, who's responsible for what becomes crucial.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
More than you say.
Totally.
Yeah.
But also this tells us something about their societal values, right?
Yeah.
Notice how the Levites are specifically excluded from military service.
Oh, that's right. The Levites.
Yeah.
They had a different role. Yeah, their role was centered around the tabernacle.
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle.
Yeah. So picture this, a portable temple meticulously designed to house God's presence amidst their journey.
Okay.
That's the tabernacle. The Levites were responsible for its upkeep and all the rituals associated with it.
So even in the wilderness, their religious duties were paramount.
Precisely.
Wow.
It shows just how deeply intertwined their faith was with their everyday life. It wasn't just something they did, on the Sabbath. It was woven into the very fabric of their society.
Now let's dive into some of the specific laws and rituals
Okay.
laid out in the Book of Numbers.
All right.
Some of these are pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
For instance, there are laws concerning leprosy and bodily discharges.
Leprosy and bodily discharges, those might seem like really specific, even odd rules to us today.
Right.
But if we step back, we see they were grappling with ideas of purity, hygiene, and community health.
Mm-hmm.
These weren't just guidelines. They reflected deep-seated anxieties about contamination, both physical and spiritual.
It's a bit like how we have rules and regulations about sanitation and disease control today, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Except theirs were tied into their spiritual beliefs as well.
Yeah, it's a fascinating parallel, isn't it?
It is.
How societies throughout history have tried to manage these very human concerns about health and well-being.
Then there's this thing called the Nazirite vow, where individuals could dedicate themselves to God through abstinence from certain things like wine and cutting their hair.
Oh, the Nazirite vow. So this wasn't a compulsory thing, right? It was a choice.
Right.
This tells us something about individual piety and the desire to express devotion in a very tangible way. It was a public declaration of their commitment to God.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about personal choices that deepen their connection with the divine.
Yeah.
But speaking of commitment, there's a whole section dedicated to the dedication of the tabernacle altar.
Right. The tabernacle, as we mentioned, was central to their faith, and the dedication ceremony described in chapter 7 gives us this incredibly detailed look at their material culture, their craftsmanship.
Wow.
It would have taken immense resources and effort to create this portable temple, which speaks volumes about their reverence for the sacred.
Imagine the dedication ceremony, a grand spectacle, right?
Absolutely.
A powerful symbol of their collective faith and identity.
Yeah. And then things take a fascinating turn. We encounter this purification ritual involving a red heifer outlined in chapter 19.
A red heifer.
Yeah.
Okay.
The ritual itself is quite intricate, and its exact meaning is still debated.
Really?
Some scholars believe it was about cleansing from contact with death, while others see it as a way to restore ritual purity more broadly. But what's clear is that it had profound symbolic significance.
I see.
And even connects to later Jewish traditions. So this red heifer ritual, it really highlights the importance of symbolic acts of cleansing and purification within their belief system. It shows how they grappled with concepts of purity and impurity, particularly in relation to death.
It's a bit like how different cultures have rituals around death and mourning rite. Ways to process grief and loss and restore a sense of order after something disruptive has happened.
Precisely. It speaks to a universal human need to make sense of mortality and find ways to cope with its presence in our lives.
It's incredible how these ancient stories can connect to such deep human experiences. But, you know, the book of Numbers isn't all censuses and rituals.
Right.
It also tells a story of leadership rebellion and the consequences that follow.
Right.
And this is where the human element really shines through, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The book of Numbers gives us this very human portrait of Moses. He's chosen by God, yes.
Right.
But he's not infallible.
Right.
He gets frustrated, he makes mistakes, and he constantly faces challenges to his authority. It makes him a much more relatable figure, don't you think?
Oh, totally. It definitely makes you realize that leadership, even divinely appointed leadership, is no walk in the park.
No.
I mean, take the rebellion of Korah and his followers in chapter 16.
Oh, yeah.
They directly challenge Moses' authority and the whole priestly hierarchy.
What's fascinating about that rebellion is that it wasn't just a power grab.
Right.
Korah and his followers were questioning the very foundation of their religious structure. They were asking, why does Moses get to be the sole intermediary with God? Why this hierarchy?
Wow.
It raises some pretty fundamental questions about, who has the authority to speak for the divine?
It makes you wonder if those questions were simmering beneath the surface for a while, right?
Yeah.
And then something sparked this open revolt.
It's a classic example of how tensions can build even in a seemingly unified community. And it reminds us that even when there's a shared belief system, there can still be disagreements about how that system should be structured and who should hold power.
And it's not just Korah causing trouble. Even Moses' own siblings, Miriam and Aaron,
Oh, right, Miriam and Aaron.
questioned his leadership in chapter 12.
Yeah.
Seems like everyone has an opinion.
Right. And this incident with Miriam and Aaron is particularly interesting because they're not necessarily trying to usurp Moses' authority. They're questioning his decisions and challenging his right to be the sole voice of God.
Okay.
It highlights the importance of open communication and dissent, even within a hierarchical structure.
It also reminds us that even those closest to us can sometimes disagree with our leadership choices.
Absolutely. Healthy relationships, whether personal or professional, can handle disagreements and constructive criticism.
Yeah.
In fact, that kind of open dialogue can often strengthen those bonds.
But the book of Numbers also shows us what happens when dissent turns into outright disobedience.
Okay.
Throughout their journey, the Israelites as a whole constantly complain and doubt God's plan,
Right.
which leads to some pretty serious consequences.
Their constant complaining really reveals this underlying tension between faith and doubt. They've witnessed incredible miracles. God has delivered them from slavery. And yet they still waver in their belief, especially when faced with hardship.
It's almost as if they need constant reassurance, constant proof
Yeah.
of God's presence and power, which is something we can all relate to, right?
Of course.
Haven't we all experienced moments of doubt, even when we know deep down that we're on the right path?
Doubt is a natural part of the human experience.
Right.
The key is how we respond to that doubt. Do we let it consume us, or do we use it as an opportunity to deepen our faith and understanding?
The Israelites' journey reminds us that faith isn't a passive state.
Right.
It's an active choice we make every single day. And sometimes that choice requires us to wrestle with our doubts and fears.
Indeed. It's in those moments of wrestling that our faith can truly grow stronger. But for the Israelites, their doubt often manifested as disobedience, which led to punishments like plagues and being forced to wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
Talk about a timeout. 40 years in the wilderness. That's a pretty stark consequence.
It highlights the seriousness with which disobedience was viewed. Their actions had consequences not just for themselves, but for the entire community.
It makes you think about the ripple effect of our own choices, right? How our actions can impact not only ourselves, but the people around us.
Absolutely. The Book of Numbers is constantly reminding us of our interconnectedness and the importance of considering the collective good.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just individuals out there on our own. We're part of something bigger. But speaking of journeys, the Israelites, they finally reached the edge of the Promised Land after all those years in the wilderness.
And this is where anticipation meets fear. You can imagine the excitement after all this time, but also the anxiety. They send spies into Canaan to scout out the land.
Right.
And they return with reports of a land flowing with milk and honey,
Wow.
but also inhabited by powerful enemies.
So it's like the dream is within reach, but there's still obstacles in the way. It's that moment of truth.
Right.
Do they trust in God's promise, or do they let fear hold them back?
Exactly. And sadly, most of the spies focus on the fearsome giants in the land.
The giants.
Causing a wave of panic among the Israelites. They start to doubt whether they can actually conquer this land, despite all that God has done for them.
It's like their past trauma, their experience of slavery and hardship is overshadowing their hope for the future.
It's a classic example of how fear can paralyze us, even when we're on the cusp of achieving something great.
Yeah.
It reminds us that sometimes the biggest battles we face are not external,
Right.
but internal.
And that internal battle can be really tough. But amidst all the fear and doubt, there are two spies, Caleb and Joshua, who remain steadfast in their faith.
Caleb and Joshua.
Yeah, they urge the people to trust that God will deliver them victory.
They represent that unwavering belief that's needed to overcome challenges. They stand as a contrast to the fear and doubt that's gripping the majority of the Israelites.
Right.
They remind us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, courage and faith can make a difference.
It's a good reminder that sometimes we need those voices of encouragement.
Yeah.
Those who remind us of our strength and resilience when we're struggling to see it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
But sadly, the Israelites don't heed Caleb and Joshua's call.
Right, and their lack of faith has devastating consequences. The entire generation that left Egypt is condemned to die in the wilderness. They never set foot in the Promised Land.
Wow.
It's a stark reminder that our choices have consequences and that succumbing to fear and doubt can lead us away from the very things we desire most.
Well, it's a tragic turn of events. But even within this tragedy, there are glimmers of hope and justice. The Book of Numbers introduces us to the laws of inheritance, specifically through the story of Zelophehad's daughters.
Oh, Zelophehad's daughter. Now, this story is remarkable.
What happens?
Zelophehad dies without any sons, and according to the existing laws, his land would have gone to his male relatives.
Oh, wow.
But his daughters boldly petition Moses, arguing that they deserve to inherit their father's property.
It's an incredibly brave act, especially considering the patriarchal structure of their society. They're essentially challenging the status quo, demanding to be treated fairly.
And what's amazing is that they win their case.
They do.
Moses takes their appeal to God, and the law is amended to ensure fairness and address this changing social reality.
Wow, so they actually changed the law.
They did. The daughters of Zelophehad provide a blueprint for us. Even in a seemingly rigid system, there's room to appeal to fairness and shift the status quo.
It's a powerful testament to the power of speaking up, of advocating for what's right, even when it seems impossible. And, the Book of Numbers doesn't just leave us with stories of rebellion and wilderness wanderings. It also looks ahead to the future, to the practicalities of building a just and structured society in the Promised Land.
Exactly. In the final chapters, we get these instructions about dividing the land and establishing cities of refuge.
Cities of refuge.
Yeah, these cities were a sort of safe haven for those who had accidentally killed someone, protecting them from blood feuds and allowing for a more measured legal process.
So as a way to balance justice with compassion, recognizing that sometimes unintended consequences happen.
Right.
And people need protection from vengeance. It was a way to prevent cycles of violence.
Precisely. The establishment of these cities shows a remarkable level of social awareness and foresight. They were creating a system that aimed to protect both individuals and the community as a whole.
It's incredible how much we can glean from a book that was written so long ago. It's like we've been on this journey with the Israelites, experiencing their triumphs and their struggles.
The Book of Numbers, despite its rather unassuming name, is so much more than just a list of names and numbers.
Right.
It's a narrative that explores the human condition, our relationship with the divine, and the timeless challenges of building a community in the face of adversity.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Book of Numbers, what do you think are the key takeaways for our listeners on the Great Indian AI podcast channel? What wisdom can we carry with us from these ancient stories?
Well, I think the Book of Numbers reminds us that challenges are an inherent part of life, both individually and collectively. It highlights the importance of faith, the dangers of unchecked dissent, the complexities of leadership, and the constant need to strive for justice and compassion in our own communities.
It's a reminder that even though we live in a very different world today, we still face many of the same fundamental questions about how to live, how to lead, and how to create a more just and compassionate world.
Absolutely. The Book of Numbers doesn't provide easy answers to these questions, but it offers a profound reflection on the human experience, one that can inspire us to confront our own challenges with greater wisdom and resilience.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Book of Numbers. Thank you for joining us on the Great Indian AI podcast channel. We hope you found this journey through ancient wisdom as insightful as we did. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. We encourage you to reflect on these stories, share your own insights, and perhaps even delve deeper into this fascinating text. Who knows what other treasures you might uncover? And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the Great Indian AI podcast channel for more deep dives into all sorts of fascinating topics. Until next time, keep learning and keep exploring.